All right, so I have not shot a deer yet this year. This is a deer that my dad actually shot, a very, very large buck. As you can tell, this is a very large animal. This is the body of the animal, had the rib cage, the spinal cord, and then the hind end is right here. So they've obviously already taken off the legs and all that good stuff. So on this particular animal, he got a good shot on it, but the round he was using is a round that is notorious for going in and it kind of keeps on going. So what happened is the bullet went in and it actually went in the front and came out the back. So it busted one of the back legs, and as it went through the body of the deer, it busted the stomach. And that's one of the things that you don't want to happen. When it does happen, all the contents obviously go, they get loose on the inside, and then you're left with kind of a mess. Now, my dad, again, he's getting up there in age. Cleaning this was hard enough. He does not want to mess with the rib cage, because if you don't just take the ribs and, just keep them whole, if you don't do that, then you have to strip all the meat away from them, which is what I do. And that's a lot of work. It takes quite a bit of time. Now, he did not want to mess with that, but luckily they've got me, and I do not let meat go to waste. I'm going to take off this animal what I can, and what I do not keep for myself is going to go to my dog. Now the fat, I save that, and I actually give that to Kelsey. She makes Hello Tallow, which is like the only venison-based tallow that we know of that's on the market. It is very, very good. It's far superior than any cow tallow that you can possibly get. Now for the bones, I will not consume the spinal cord. It is not really a good thing to consume that, like if you want to keep it and use it for bone broth, because the spinal cord itself can actually carry like prion disease, which is chronic wasting disease, which is actually kind of a problem among deer population. And consuming the spinal cord and the spine just increases your risk of consuming an animal that is carrying that disease. So the spinal cord will go to waste, but nothing goes to waste, okay? So when I say it goes to waste, this is going to get thrown out in the woods out back. There are a lot of coyotes in my area, and there are a lot of buzzards, and they're going to get this probably within a day's time. Everything else, all the individual ribs, I will take them out, and I'm going to crack them in half, cut them in half, and I'll put them in a crock pot, and that's going to be bone broth. But I'm going to dive right into this thing. So I've got a few different kinds of knives I'm going to use here. I've got a fillet knife. This works very well as a boning knife. I've got another smaller boning knife, and then I have just a general use knife, which this has interchangeable blades. This is probably what I'll start out with, and I'm just going to start cutting away all this meat that is along these ribs. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a huge flap of meat right here, and I'm just going to start pulling that away. And that's going to expose the ribs underneath. And then I'll start cutting the meat out from around those ribs. And when I'm done, it'll be nothing but a skeleton. All right, so I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to start cutting away at this. And you can see how it kind of separates. So a lot of people throw this stuff away. And you can see here that if I wasn't to have taken this, this would have been scrap. And this is a lot of food. This is a lot of meat right here that would have went to waste. But again, it doesn't really go to waste because it does go back to nature. But the fact that this amount of meat could be used to feed someone, or could be used to feed, their animal or something like that, that is a lot of meat to go to waste. And that is something I would not want to happen, because wasting food in my book is never okay. When you kill an animal and you take its life, the least you can do to honor that animal is to use every single bit of that animal and use it to nourish yourself, or use it to nourish your family or your dog or something. The animal's life has to have a purpose. And, taking that purpose away and just basically killing the animal and letting it go to waste, to me, that is just morally wrong. It is very, very wrong. And I just don't agree with it. There's a lot of people that do that. I've actually seen people that will kill deer or kill animals just for sport. And that is something I will never get behind. So my background is Cherokee. My great-great-grandmother on both sides of the family was full-blood Cherokee. And I often wonder if that's one of the reasons why this kind of thing resonates with me so much, because I'm kind of a wuss. When it comes to stuff like this, when it comes to like blood and guts and all that, I'm a huge wuss. Like, I do not like the sight of blood. I don't like seeing people get hurt. I don't like that kind of gore. But when it comes to an animal, I go hunting and I take an animal's life, and I can do this kind of stuff. I can clean the animal from start to finish, and it feels very, very natural. I have never in my life had an experience where it has grossed me out or left me feeling nauseated. And, I often wonder if that's because of my heritage, like where I come from, my bloodline, that kind of stuff. It's just a very natural thing, because when we think about Native Americans, a lot of people will say, oh, well, they ate grains and they ate other foods and stuff too. They didn't just eat meat. And that is true. All right. I'm not saying that's not true. But if you really read into Indians and you do your research on like what Indians actually consumed, and you get away from the propaganda, because a lot of the stuff that you'll read online is based in like the 1800s and the 1900s, when people were actually like observing the Indians and they were documenting what they saw. And that was already after the buffalo had been killed off for the most part. So they were seeing them eating grains, and it was like grain heavy diets and stuff because they had no other option. And that's the thing about Indians. It's just like us. And it's just like our dogs. They're survivalists. So they learned how to farm and do agriculture and stuff. So in times of hardship, in the winter and stuff like that, they had food to get them by if they couldn't find animals. But their entire culture was based around animals. I mean, the clothes they wore on their backs, their shoes, all that was leather. That was from the animal's hide. The teepees, their shelters, all hide. It was all from animals. Their jewelry, for the most part, was from animals. Antlers, bones, things like that. Everything about the animal had a purpose. And that's what I try and strive to be. And that's what I strive to do is make sure that the sacrifice of the animal's life has purpose and meaning. Because if you're just killing an animal to kill it, I mean, that's borderline psychopathic, honestly, because you're taking away the meaning of the animal's life. Because even if an animal was in the wild, there are going to be very few animals that make it to old age. Look at this big chunk of meat. This is a lot of meat right here. I just pulled off. Now I am going to separate this, by the way, and you can see it's got some blood stuff in here. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to separate like the fat from this and the tendon and get this stuff off there. But all the stuff I separate, like this bad stuff, what I consider quote unquote bad, this is going to go for my dog. The fat and stuff will go for the tallow. You can see that's a big chunk of fat there. And you notice that the fat is not really in the muscle meat. It's like on the outside. That's kind of how deer are, because they're very lean animals. But all this is going to go for tallow. And then this good meat here will be split between me and my dog. And I just throw this all in a bowl or throw it all in a tray. And then I'll go through and I'll separate all that later. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, an animal's life has to have purpose, has to have meaning. When it's in the wild, there's going to be very few animals that make it to old age and actually just die naturally without something actively consuming them. Because what will happen is, an animal will become weak and it will get old and frail. And the moment it does that, there are a lot of predators out there that are waiting in the wind, ready to take that animal. Because that animal is going to be nourishment and it's going to provide life for another animal. And that is the circle of life. It may be a harsh reality for people to accept, but food and where our food comes from, it's not sunshine and rainbows. Look at this big chunk of fat. That's great tallow right there. And this is actually organ fat. So this is what you would consider like suet from the deer. But yeah, wildlife is not sunshine and rainbows. It is a very, very harsh world out there. And it is literally survival of the fittest. The moment an animal shows sign of weakness and starts to degrade in health is the moment it ceases to exist. I personally have been out in the woods before, and I've seen, a young fawn with its mother get attacked by a coyote, and the coyote killed the young fawn because the young fawn was very young, it was very weak, and the mother simply couldn't defend itself, and the coyote capitalized on that. And, it must have been very, very hungry to take that risk. It was by itself. It wasn't with a pack. But it killed and ate that fawn. And I witnessed that happen. And, this right here, what I'm doing, this is not glamorous. All right? This is not a glamorous life. There's nothing sexy about any of this. If I had it my way, I wouldn't do it because I do love animals and I don't really like killing them. This is something that's kind of a necessity for me. And it's something I think is also important because it really gets you in tune with where your food comes from. And it basically puts us back to how our ancestors would have done this, because there were no grocery stores back in the day. You know, this is how food was taken for all of our existence, literally all of our existence up until the last, couple hundred years. And really the last 100 years. And this is the reality of it. So, I mean, if you eat meat, and if you're actively consuming meat, and let's say you don't agree with this, you don't agree with going out and killing an animal and all that, I'm sorry, but you're consuming meat. This is happening. For every steak you consume, this is happening. For every piece of meat that you eat, for every, if you drink bone broth, or if you eat tallow or whatever, if it's an animal product, this is happening to the food that you're eating. And, a lot of us want to disassociate ourselves from that, and we just don't want to think about it because it's a harsh reality, and, maybe it kind of hurts us inside, and it chips away at us a little bit morally. But this is the reality, and I think this is very important for people to understand and know, because we've become so disconnected from where our food comes from. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there's people that don't even know, lemons grow on trees, for example. And you think I'm making that up, think I'm joking, I'm being serious. There are people out there that really are that disconnected from where our food comes from that this right here would gross them out. But it's like, have you ever eaten a hamburger? Have you ever eaten a steak? Because this is happening, and not only is it happening when you eat those foods from big industry, it's happening on an industrial scale. So, instead of just this one animal being taken, and this is getting split right now between, 3 people and 2 dogs, because my parents have a dog as well. So they got a lot of the meat off this. I'm getting meat off this, both the dogs. And it's going to feed us for quite a while, just this one animal. And if it was a cow, it would probably feed all of us for about a year. That's a single animal, all right? Now, when you consume hamburger or meat or whatever it is from big industry, it could come from 20, 30 different cows. That one piece of meat that you're consuming, if it's like ground beef or something like that. Obviously, if it's a steak, it can only come from one animal. But rest assured that if you've got a pack of steaks, let's say a pack of like 10 ribeyes or 5 ribeyes, if they weren't all cut from the same loin, there's a pretty good chance that those are coming from multiple animals. Another huge chunk of meat. Check that out. And again, that's the reality of the situation. This is reality. This is getting in tune with where your food comes from. And I do think this is very, very important. It's important to understand that when you consume meat, it's not something to be taken lightly. Because you are actually killing an animal when you consume meat. And that is not something that should be readily dismissed or taken lightly at all. Because you are actively taking another living organism's life. And I mean, it sounds like a bad thing, but that's going to be true for all of pretty much anything you eat, unless you're eating lab-grown whatever, in which case your health is going to be completely destroyed if you're eating lab-grown meat or whatever. But even if you're eating plants, something is actively dying so that you can thrive, so that you can survive. Because, they'll say that, oh, well, when you consume plants, there's no death to animals and stuff like that. That is 100% false, number one, because that's what anti-biologics are for. Pesticides to kill living organisms, herbicides to kill plants. And when you consume plants, you're consuming a living organism. A plant is a living organism. So something is always going to die for something else to survive. In our world, that's just the way things are. So if I'm going to eat meat, and I've been doing carnivore now for 5.5 years, like 5 years and 6 months now. I started in April of 2019, and I've consumed probably 5,500 pounds of meat, because I eat roughly about 1,000 pounds a year, which is about a cow a year. Then if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to honor the animal and do the best I can to make sure I consume every part of that animal. That way that animal's life was not taken in vain. And that's the least I can do for that animal, because it has provided me with so much nourishment, and it has healed me in ways that I could never have imagined. I mean, when I came to Carnivore, I was extremely sick. And I mean, I say this all the time, pretty much all my videos, but I think it's important because that's the whole reason this channel was birthed, is because I was really sick and I healed myself with a carnivore diet. But I was on the brink of death. You know, I was wasting away. I went from 230 pounds. I had been weightlifting. I had gained a significant amount of muscle from like 145 to 230 pounds. And then when I got sick, I lost all that in 6 months. I went back to 145 pound skinny kid. I had autoimmune conditions. I had leaky gut, SIBO, candida overgrowth. I found out I had parasites. I had supraventricular tachycardia, which is a heart condition that sucks really bad. I don't wish that on anybody. I had severe food allergies. My allergies in general went haywire. I mean, just crazy, crazy allergies. And then, of course, along with that, histamine intolerance, H. pylori, you know, I started getting heartburn real bad, and then I got super constipated and all this stuff. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's a dozen, 2 dozen, a few dozen things that happened to me that was really bad. You know, through all that, the carnivore diet saved my life. And had I not landed on this lifestyle, I'm very confident I would not be here today. And you know, the carnivore lifestyle, it's becoming a lot more popular. There are a lot more people jumping on the bandwagon because they've seen the positive results that all these other people have had. People are kind of catching on to this. And the more people that catch on, I think it's a great thing because, you know, obviously people are reclaiming their health. They're getting in the best shape of their life. They're able to basically eat as much as they want without gaining weight. And, you know, their health improves, aches and pains go away, autoimmune conditions go into remission. All these great things happen, but it's very easy to do that and still not be connected with your food and where your food comes from, and just go to the grocery store and just buy meat, not thinking about all the animals that have lost their lives because you're consuming meat. And the more people that consume meat and go on a animal-based or carnivore diet, that's more animals that are going to die. And it's a good thing. Not that the animals are dying, but the animals dying actually now have a purpose. You know, the people that go carnivore, they're not going to waste meat. I mean, if that's anything I can tell you from the people that are carnivore, like, you're going to eat the meat you have, because once you're carnivore for a while, it's going to taste fantastic, and that's all you're going to want. And you're just going to want meat, and you'll go out and you'll buy meat, and food waste goes way down. You start being much less wasteful. So when you go to the grocery store and you buy this meat, there's a pretty good chance it's going to get consumed instead of sitting on the shelf and, you know, basically sitting there until the sell-by date, and then it possibly getting, you know, thrown away and going to waste, because America does have a huge food waste problem. That's a big concern as well. But what I've noticed too with a lot of carnivores is once they go carnivore for a while, they really do start to get in tune with where their food comes from, more than the average person, I think. Because I think what happens is once you're carnivore and you start to come to a lot of these realizations about food, and that we've kind of been lied to about food, and, you know, the food we thought was healthy isn't healthy, and the food that we've been told is unhealthy actually is very healthy. People start looking into that, and they start looking into a lot of other things, and then they start really caring about where their food comes from, and then they start shifting over to local farms and ranches, which is an amazing thing, because local farms and ranches really need our help right now. I mean, there's over 40 farm closures, local family-owned farm closures every single day in the U.S. And we lose like 100 and some thousand farms. I can't remember what the number is. It's a lot of farms. We lose a lot of farms every single year. It's like in the tens or hundreds of thousands of small local family-owned farms every single year. And that is a terrifying thing, because the more farms we lose, the more reliant we become on big industry, the more consolidated our food system gets. And once we run out of local family-owned farms, we're left with a food system that only cares about money and greed. They only care about profit, and they do not care about the health of the consumer, which is us. Therefore, they feed us toxic garbage, anything that can keep us addicted and coming back to it, so that we buy more and we spend more money. That's what it's all about. So let me show you here. I'm gonna flip this around I'm gonna show you what I'm doing on this thing here. So this is another belly flap, as I like to call it. You can see it runs along the side of the rib here. I'm just gonna come in here and I'm gonna cut this joker right off. I'm gonna run my boning knife right down this rib. And again, I'll end up separating this out because you can see it's kind of dirty. I did hose this thing off with the garden hose because again, it was, you know, it had a gut busted and stuff in there. But this outer membrane will actually peel away. And then once I peel this away, I'll give this to my dog. And then the meat underneath is clean and I can either keep that for myself or I can split that with her. So again, that's a huge piece of meat. And a lot of people do not keep this stuff. They let it go to waste, which is a crying shame. So I've also got some meat down in here. And this is some of the most tender part of the deer right here. This is the underside of the hind legs because the hind leg would connect right here. So I just come in here with my boning knife, cut the tendon away, and I'm going to take that right out of there. And you can see how easily this cuts because this is a very, very tender piece of meat. Now, unfortunately, this one's kind of busted up because the bullet did kind of graze it, but that's some fantastic stuff right there. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get all this smaller meat out of here too. And you can see there's some down here. There's a lot, but I'm gonna go ahead and trim this outer layer off on the other side of the rib here, get this separated. So I will say that one of the worst things about like modern gun and hunting with a rifle is the amount of damage that's done to the carcass. If you don't get a perfectly good shot on the animal, or you have a rifle that's a little bit overpowered, because there is such thing as an overpowered rifle for the kind of game you're hunting, then it can damage the animal quite a bit. And for most people, that's going to lead to waste, because if you don't have a dog and you don't keep that, that beat up, bruised up meat and stuff for your dog, a lot of people are going to throw that out because a lot of people don't want to consume stuff like this. And this is, you can see the hole is actually right here. That's where the bullet went in. And once I flip this around, you'll be able to see a little better, but a lot of people will cut around that and they'll throw that out. But having a dog is fantastic because I personally don't consume that either. But I will definitely keep that for my dog because there's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't look visually appealing. And there's a lot of there's a leaf on there too. I didn't clean this very well apparently. It was like sitting outside overnight. It's only 40 degrees here. So the deer has been, hung for like a day, and then my dad cut it up and processed it yesterday. But again, this is something, getting back to nature and getting back to the way we used to do things. Something that would have happened. You would have drug your animal through the ground, through the grass and through the woods to get it out, which is exactly what we do. And you're going to have dirt and stuff on there. It's just part of it. But that's the reason why we have a very, very low pH stomach, because our acidic stomach can kill off any kind of, potential bacteria and stuff like that if we drag our animal through the dirt like what happened to this thing. This is a tremendous amount of meat that's coming off this deer. This is crazy. I'm going to get this cut away here and I'll show this to you. And the lower portion of the neck is still on here on this end too. Just a small piece of it. This is probably a 5 or 6 pound piece of meat right here. Check this out. So again, you can see where the trauma is right here. And that stuff, again, people would probably just throw this out. But this is, again, 5 or 6 pounds of meat, maybe more. That's a lot. So I might actually need a bigger bowl. I might be running out of room here. Come in here and trim this off. I mean, even that small little piece right there. The average American, that's a fun fact for you. The average American consumes about 2.5 ounces of red meat a day, which is a little bit more than this. If you think about how sad that is and the state of our country, they want to blame all the chronic illnesses and chronic conditions and stuff on people consuming meat and red meat. That amount of meat right there, well, it's probably about like this. Smaller than that actually, but something like this is about what the average American consumes. And that's the root of our problems, right? Like, that makes a lot of sense. You gotta cut through the propaganda. I mean, for real. Some more good meat there. Cut through the propaganda. Think for yourself. That's one of the best things we can do, is stop listening to like modern or mainstream information, like mainstream media and stuff. God, the information they put out is just so backwards and horrible. It's one of the best things I did for myself years ago, actually. When I moved into this house, I stopped watching TV. Like I moved in this house in 2009. I actually designed and built this house and stuff back then. And I've never been a huge like TV watcher anyway. But for the longest time when I first moved in, I didn't even have a TV in here for like the first 2 or 3 years because I was traveling so much. And then when I finally got a TV, I never really turned it on, you know, except to watch movies because I am a big movie buff. But I never watch TV anymore. And that has been a big eye-opener for me too, because the information I get now is from like my peers, somewhat social media, and just talking to people and stuff and doing my own research. And that has opened my eyes up to a lot of different things, because we're being lied to so much by the mainstream media. If you're still watching mainstream media, I feel for you. You should not do it. It's so negative. Everything that's in mainstream media is negative, and it's the exact opposite of what we should be doing for ourselves. You know, they try and feed us this consumerism BS, and, you know, you need to be buying all this stuff so you can keep up with the Joneses, and, oh, go out and get your brand new car that just came out. You know, we've only had the last model out for 2 years, but now we're going to completely redesign it so you can go buy a new one. I mean, they basically made cars like they have phones. It's like every 2 years you've got a complete redesign. You got to run out and get the next best car, and they're no better than the car before. And when you boil it down, a car is 4 wheels and an engine. It always has been. Ever since the first car was created, there is nothing that's changed about a car, except for the fact there's more gadgets in them now. And some would argue they're a little bit more fuel efficient and go faster, but still 4 wheels and an engine. That's gets you from point A to B. That's it. But, you know, let's go out and spend $80,000 on a car because the media tells you to. Or let's go buy a $500,000 house even though it's like 1 or 2 people living in it. It's absolutely insane. That's the kind of stuff that you get away from when you stop listening to the media. You start thinking for yourself. And then, you know, obviously when it comes to food, that's a big one too, because the media would love us to believe that saturated fat, red meat is horrible for our health. Even though here we are, a lot of us carnivores, we've been doing this for a long time. And most of us have overcome serious chronic conditions eating only meat. And then you've got more and more people that are following this lifestyle every single day. They're seeing amazing success. So, you know, obviously you do the exact opposite of what the media tells you and you improve your health. Go figure, right? And I think that's true for a lot of things. Not just diet and nutrition, but a lot of other things too. It's kind of funny. I saw an article, I think a couple months ago, and it was saying that people that exercise are like right-wing conspiracy theorists, and exercise is actually bad for you. It's going to lead to an early death and all that. I'm sitting there like, man, oh man, you know what? I guess our ancestors must have just been genetically different, because they didn't intend to exercise all the time, but they sure did, because they were out doing stuff like this. They were out hunting animals, and they were building, you know, amazing structures and architecture, and building castles and kingdoms. They were fighting wars, and they were doing all this amazing stuff at a time when it shouldn't have been possible. And that all that stuff equals a lot of freaking exercise, a lot more than the average person gets today, that's for sure. And I mean, I don't know exactly what their life expectancy was back then. I know a lot of people say, oh, it's, you know, it was a lot shorter. But if you take into account infant death rates, which were very, very high back then, and the fact that we didn't have modern medicine or healthcare, then I would say that if you lived to be, you know, your 20s or late teens, there was a pretty good chance you were going to live to be pretty freaking old, as long as something crazy didn't happen or you didn't get killed in war or something. I don't know. It seems like back then we were able to create quite a bit more than we are now. You know, the structures we have now, I can't remember where I read it, but it was saying something like, if there was no maintenance done on a lot of these structures that we have, even the most magnificent ones like skyscrapers and stuff, within like 100 or a couple hundred years, they would basically be falling down. And you look at a lot of stuff over in Europe, I've been over there a lot, and there's a lot of ancient architecture and structures over there that have lasted the test of time thousands and thousands of years. And they are just as beautiful today as they were back then. And they're actually absolutely mesmerizing. I mean, seeing that stuff is like, I don't know, it's wild. It's wild to think we were even able to create that kind of stuff because it's so beautiful and so intricate and well made, especially for the time period. All right, so I think I'm ready to start cutting these ribs here. So what I'm going to do here is just cut in between each individual rib. I'm going to start out with my short boning knife, but I may have to go to my longer one depending on how this goes. So these things come out pretty much like a piece of bacon. You're going to see that here in a second. And this is what comes out of each individual rib. So you've got like the tendon on the inside and then the meat on the outside. And there's usually a layer of fat in here. This is a pretty lean deer, but there's a little fat on the end. This right here makes the best, the absolute best ground venison that you've ever had. I actually grind this up in my Ninja, and it grinds up pretty much instantly as soon as you hit it. And I patty it up, make it in ground venison. So I'm going to start a separate bowl for that and get that going. And continue these rib cuts here. Now, like I was saying before, you can actually just take the entire rib and just cook the rib itself, but I've gotten away from doing that over the last couple years because it does take up quite a bit of room in the freezer. And I like to be able to just take the meat and cook it how I want. Like if I wanted to cook this on the grill, I could. A lot of times I'll grind it up and make the burger out of it. Check that out. They have very, very small ribs compared to like beef and stuff. I would say they're more akin to like a lamb rib, but they're even thinner than that. So yeah, if you cut all the way down there, you'll separate each one. You can see how the three separate. And then I'll end up breaking these off. I'll take the rest of the meat that's on the ends. And then these ribs is what I'll use for my bone broth, which it does make amazing bone broth, by the way. But yeah, cutting the rib meat out, it just makes it more versatile, because if I do want to use the rib meat for ground beef or ground venison, I can do that without having to pull them out of the freezer and basically go through this process. Then it's already done. And I'm more likely to, especially on an animal this size, I'm more likely to want to consume the rib meat in that way versus the entire rib, because there's so much meat here. And if I cook this rib for myself on the grill, I don't think I'd be able to eat the whole thing, not off this animal. This is quite a few pounds of meat probably here. So, I mean, if you've never hunted before, I would highly recommend it. And you don't have to live out in the country like I do to be able to hunt. So on my website, apexpackandtribe.com, which I can put a link in the description below, I actually have some resources on there that is specifically for like helping people become more nutritionally independent, and being able to be more self-reliant and stuff like that. And what some of those resources are is like numbers and contact information for local fish and wildlife in every single state. And if you find your state and you find the information for your local fish and game in your area, and you go to the website and you contact them, you can actually learn exactly what it takes to be able to hunt and, basically source your own wild game in your area. And in a lot of cases, it's just a matter of obviously being smart and educated on gun safety and how to, shoot properly, and how to avoid shooting towards, civilization, and, basic gun safety, essentially. You have to be smart on that, obviously. You have to be able to get your hunting and fishing license. And then it's just a matter of finding public hunting in your area. And there are plenty of places where you can hunt publicly. Most military bases actually allow it. And you can get into their, I don't remember if they have lotteries now, or if it's just like getting put on the list or whatever to be able to hunt certain areas. But when season rolls around, most military bases open up sections of the military base so that you can hunt. And military bases actually have a lot of huge deer And I'm talking every military base that I've ever been to. I've been to a lot of military bases, but they have they have really big deer, and there's a lot of deer out there too, and they're not very scared of people. So if you're a novice hunter, it makes it very, very easy to go in there, find a deer, and kill it, and take it home and have fresh meat for your freezer. And you know, we like to count ourselves out of the natural process and think that we're above nature and that we're not involved in all that. But humans have always been a part of nature, and they've been a part of the hunting process. They've been a part of natural selection and the circle of life in nature. We are not disconnected from that. Just because we have, you know, domesticated animals and we raise them for food now, does not mean we're still not a part of that, because that is actually still being a part of nature. We've just chosen to select the animals we consume now and raise them on our own instead of letting nature raise them for us. But like I was talking about earlier, you know, our ancestors and stuff, they hunted. We were part of that natural process that goes on in the wild. We were out there, we were taking animals, we were consuming them. It's part of the natural selection. It's part of survival of the fittest. We're still a part of that. And we actually do play a very important role in the balance of nature, because if we did not hunt, then animal populations would get out of control. Because of the human presence, there aren't as many predators out there, and the balance of nature actually relies on us hunting some of these animals and taking them. That's why hunting is allowed in states. That's why they promote it. Like in the state I'm in, we actually have unlimited doe. You can hunt and kill as many does as you want. And that is because there are so many does out there that if we weren't to do that, then the doe population could get out of control. That increases the risk of disease and famine, and a lot of really bad things could happen for deer because they would overconsume, they would wipe out our crops, they would wipe out their own food source, and it would really cause an imbalance in nature. So to be a part of that is a very fulfilling thing, because number one, it allows you to source your own food. It puts you in touch with where your food comes from, puts you in touch with nature. But it also helps control the wildlife population. And again, that is very, very important, because we are not disconnected from that. We're still a part of it, whether we want to believe it or not. All right, so I've pretty much got this side stripped down. You can see all the individual ribs here. I've still got some meat on the ends here, which I'm going to come in and trim off. And then more or less, it's just a matter of coming in, and these kind of have joints. You can see they move around. So I'll just cut those loose, and then I'll take the ribs off, and I'll repeat the same process for the other side. So, you know, a lot of rib meat, like beef ribs and stuff like that, they're kind of tough, or they can be kind of tough. I've had some tough ones and I've had some really tender ones, but deer ribs are very, very tender. The meat is very tender, and that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. And I always say, like, if you're wasting your rib meat and you're just throwing this out as waste, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, because this actually is very, very good meat. I'm gonna have to come up here and cut this loose here. But yeah, I don't waste anything off the animal. I try and take as much as I possibly can. And that's what carnivore is all about. You know, when I first started carnivore, that's one of the big things that people was always talking about, was eating nose to tail. I don't hear as much of that anymore as I used to for some reason, but I still think that is very, very important. Eating nose to tail, not only to honor the animal and to not waste food, but also because every part of the animal is going to give you a different range of nutrients. You know, you think about the nutrients and stuff that's in muscle meat is not the same as the nutrients that's in organs, and is not the same that's in nutrients in fat. You know, spleen, for example, a lot of people discount spleen, and they're like, oh, you know, that's another filter organ, kind of like a liver, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, spleen is one of the highest organs and parts of the animal in vitamin C of anything else that you can possibly consume. It is very, very high in vitamin C. So if you ever want to make sure you're getting your RDA on vitamin C, or at least getting enough vitamin C, spleen is the way to do it. So kidney is another big one. Kidney is very, very high in DAO, which is a enzyme that your body actually naturally produces, and it's responsible for clearing histamine from your system. So when you have histamine intolerance, and this is true for a lot of people, anybody that has histamine intolerance, if you're listening to this, this is very important. Your body probably is having a hard time producing enough DAO. And when you consume kidney, when you start eating a lot of that, it boosts the DAO in your system because kidney is very high in DAO. And it actually allows your body to start producing it itself. It actually kind of kickstarts the process. So the more DAO you have in your system through eating kidney, the more your histamine problems are going to resolve. And then as your body clears that histamine out and you're getting that DAO in your system, it kickstarts the process of your body being able to naturally produce it. And then that sets you up to permanently curing your histamine intolerance. And that is one of the big ways that I actually cured my histamine intolerance. There's a lot of factors that come into play with that. Like you also have to make sure that you don't have leaky gut. And if you have a leaky gut, you need to go in there and you need to do all the things that's necessary to heal that leaky gut, because that is going to create histamine problems and it's going to prevent you from being able to cure your histamine intolerance. But provided you have all that squared away and the only thing you're dealing with is a histamine intolerance issue, DAO is one of the fastest ways to cure that problem. There's a huge chunk of fat right there. Very nice. So the thing about deer fat is that it is not very good to consume and actually eat deer fat, because it's much higher in stearic acid and that makes it very, very waxy. And when you eat it, it'll solidify above room temperature. So when you eat it, it gets stuck all over your gums and in your mouth and stuff. And to me, it's just very, very nasty. I do not like consuming deer fat because of that reason, because your body temperature will not melt it and it'll just get everywhere in your mouth. It's nasty, nasty, nasty. So what I always do is I keep it and use it for tallow, and it works perfect for tallow because it's higher in stearic acid, because of the fact that it does solidify above room temperature. It actually works much better for tallow than beef fat does because of that reason. It's more of a waxy-like consistency instead of it being like greasy. So it penetrates better, it stays on your skin better, it lasts longer, and it heals your skin much, much faster and much better than beef tallow. That stuff that Kelsey makes, it's called Hello Tallow. It is wild. I mean, she puts like emu oil and castor oil and stuff like that in there too to kind of boost the properties, the healing properties even more. But I'm telling you right now, the first time I used that, like she made it up and stuff, and she was like, here, try some of this. So I put it on my face, and like the next morning, no joke, I had a noticeable difference of fine lines on my face. It is wild, wild, wild how well that stuff works. I use it on my hands in the winter because my hands are notorious for getting dried out and cracking and stuff, because I'm always outside and the cold air and stuff just dries your knuckles out. So my knuckles will crack open, they'll actually bleed in the wintertime. But since I started using that, I do not have that problem. That is completely gone. So I use tallow in the winter religiously now to keep that from occurring. And it has been an absolute savior, I will say that. So if you haven't jumped on the tallow bandwagon, and if you haven't tried tallow for skincare, instead of using like a bunch of different, cosmetic products and stuff, I highly recommend it, because cosmetics are full of a bunch of harmful chemicals that we shouldn't be putting on our skin and we shouldn't be absorbing into our bodies. And when you go back to tallow, which is again something our ancestors used to use for their skin, then you're getting away from all that. You're focusing on a natural product that is something we've used for thousands of years. I mean, I've actually been in antique stores and they have little tins. If you're old enough to remember this, I'm not, but I've seen these in antique stores. But they had little tins of tallow, and it was like mutton tallow and stuff like that. And it was for skincare. It's these little metal tins with like awesome little graphics on the outside and stuff. And that's what we used to use. And you know, that stuff's been demonized. There's even articles out there now talking about how tallow is so bad and you shouldn't use tallow because you don't know where it comes from and all this stuff. There's articles saying that, and then they recommend a product that has 50 ingredients in there, 30 of which are, you know, petrochemicals, and you're putting that on your skin and absorbing that in your body, and they want to say that's better. It's like, you'd be better off using nothing at all if you're going to use something like that. Again, stay away from mainstream media. That's the key thing here. Get back to the basics, focus on the things our ancestors used to do, get in touch with where your food comes from, where your products come from, because that's another big one. We don't put enough emphasis on the products we use on our body, and because it's not just food. There's a lot of stuff that we put in our bodies, or that goes into our bodies, that comes from, you know, the stuff we put on our skin or wherever, that is not doing us any favors. A lot of endocrine disruptors. And those endocrine disruptors, they lead to all the things that we're having problems with. You know, we're talking about cancers, diabetes, metabolic dysfunction, hormone disruption, infertility. That's another big one that we're having problems with right now. And that's what endocrine disruptors do. They cause those things. They essentially wreck your entire body. And that's what we're seeing happening in the US right now, because of all this toxic crap that we're exposed to. So whether or not you hunt your own animals and you go through a process like this, if you can do that, that's an amazing thing. And you're definitely going to be doing yourself a lot of favors by doing that, just because you're getting food from a natural source. You know exactly where it comes from. You're processing it yourself. It's a very fulfilling thing. You know, it actually brings meaning into taking an animal's life and consuming it. That's an amazing thing. But at the same time, it's kind of irrelevant, in the sense that as long as you can get away from toxic exposure, minimize the toxins you put in your body as much as possible, not consume food from big industry as much as possible, and just be very cognizant of the fact that a lot of the stuff out there and a lot of the stuff we've been told is healthy is not healthy. And getting away from that is going to do wonders for your overall health. All right, so this side is done. So I'll just kind of show you what I've done here. You can see that all the individual ribs are completely stripped. I've stripped in between all of the different pieces of backbone here. I've taken pretty much as much of this as I can get. I'll probably shave a little bit more off that, but this is more or less spine right here. And I'm going to come in and trim these small pieces off, and then I'm just going to take these ribs off. And then again, this is bone broth stuff right here. So to get these ribs off, I'm going to use my universal knife here. Cut the joint, which should be right along the spine. And then once I get it cut, it should break away. And there's an individual rib. So I'll stack these up, and then these will go in a crock pot. And I usually do like usually about 18 to 24 hours. I don't like going over 24 hours in a crock pot because the collagen breaks down a little bit too far, and then you don't get the benefits from that. So here lately I've been doing like 16, 18, 20 hours or so. And that seems to be the sweet spot on low in a crock pot. And I'll put that in the fridge overnight after I take the bones out and stuff. And it gels up by the next morning. And then I'll put it in my containers and store it in the freezer. And I consume bone broth every single day, usually right after my workout. And then here lately I've actually been consuming a little bit in the evening too, which I normally don't do, but I have so much of it right now because, believe it or not, since this is deer season, this is my fifth set of ribs I've worked up within the last week, because there's a lot of people around me that's killing deer and they don't want to go through this process because it is kind of lengthy. So I take their ribs, I don't let their stuff go to waste, and I do this exactly what I'm doing now. And yeah, this will be the fifth set of ribs I put away. So I'm very bone broth rich right now. And I'm actually rib meat rich too, which is fantastic because I love this. But this should be a little booger right here. There it is. There's another one there. And get this joker cut. He broke off. That's going to happen sometimes. But yeah, I have not shot a deer yet. I've seen on average about 5 deer every single day I've went out hunting so far. But I'm pretty selective about what I shoot these days because I'm not really hard up for meat. I've got quite a bit still. I don't have any deer meat except for what I put away in ribs right now because I've already consumed all that. But I've got a lot of other meats and stuff in my freezers. And the deer I've been seeing are either very small or they're like families and stuff. You know, I've got a doe that keeps coming through that's got 2 really small fawns with her. They're like goat sized. And I just can't bring myself to take the doe, which if I was going to take any of them, it would have been the doe. But, you know, you take the doe and then the fawns are so small that they probably wouldn't survive on their own. There's a predator or something that's going to get them, probably a coyote. So if you take the doe, you pretty much assume you might be taking the smaller deer's life as well. And that actually happened. My neighbor across the street, he had a friend over there hunting, and there was a couple little fawns that came through without a mom, which the mom had already probably been shot, and he watched the coyote get them right in front of him. That kind of stuff happens. Again, nature is not a Disney movie. It is very, very real and very uncensored and uncut out there, and it's a survival game. But you know, every action that you take, everything that you do, you kill an animal, is going to impact some other animal's life. Again, we are a part of that process. Natural selection, survival of the fittest, all that. We're part of it. And the fact that somebody took that doe led to one of the fawns getting eaten by a coyote. It's something that happens. It's a trickle-down effect. You know, you throw a rock in a pond of water and it ripples out. That's just the way things are. So again, hunting and stuff like that, it really puts you in tune to that, and it makes you appreciate what you have. It makes you appreciate the food you consume. Because when you put in the work and you do all this work to get the food you're eating, you're going to appreciate it a lot more than going to the grocery store and just picking it up and throwing it in your cart. Like when I eat this steak, when I eat some of this rib meat, you better believe I'm going to appreciate the crap out of it because it's going to be a lot of work getting it out of here. So, and when I go through the trouble of, you know, harvesting a deer, I also try my hardest, unless I get into a bind and I just simply can't do it, but I try my hardest to drag that deer out myself. I don't run and get a four-wheeler or, you know, use a cart or anything like that. I work for it, and I feel like I owe the deer that much. You know, back in the day, that's what we would have done. We worked for our food. There's something very primal and instinctual about that, and it's something I really enjoy. So I work for it, and then I don't eat until I'm done doing that work, and then I'll have a feast on the animal that I just took. I've studied a lot on, you know, Native Americans and stuff like that, since that is my heritage, my background. And I try and honor their traditions as much as possible when it comes to how they used to do things and what they use for medicine and the food they consumed and stuff like that. And that has done wonders for me in terms of appreciating the small things. Getting back to the basics is one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done. And I think since we've become so disconnected from that, that's probably why people are so unhappy, because there's a part of us that we're essentially missing now. That, you know, for all of history, up until the last 100 years or so, we would have been doing and we would have been playing a part of, and now all of a sudden we're not a part of that. We're just disconnected from it. Oh, it's getting harder and harder towards the front. But you got to wonder if that's contributing to everyone being so dissatisfied with their lives and the mental health crisis and stuff that's going on in America. All the things that we used to do as humans for thousands of years that got us to this point, all of a sudden we're extremely disconnected from. You have to wonder if it has some sort of impact. And I would say that it does. Whoa. That one's getting hard. All right, so that rib is gone. All right, so there's one half down. Got my pile of ribs here, bone broth. I'm going to strip the rest of this meat off right here, which I can go ahead and cut that off. A lot of this is actually fat, which is a pretty big chunk of fat right here. So I'll probably trim this out. There is some, like, I think a big artery or something running through the middle of this. I'll trim that out, but the rest of that fat, tallow. All right, so let me flip this around. Now this tendon on the back here too, I'm gonna trim that off and give that to the dog. And a lot of the meat that I'm taking off this, since it is kind of dirty and stuff and it's been sitting around for a little while, some of this I probably will cook, especially the stuff that has, you know, like gut on it, essentially, from where the deer's gut busted open on the inside. I am probably gonna actually cook some of that down for the dog, just to mitigate the risk of foodborne illness and that kind of stuff. I don't like to take any chances. Even though in the wild, this is stuff that she would be consuming. But, you know, I love my dog, so why risk it, right? And it is very important to have a super sharp knife when you do this stuff. Because without that piece of bacon right there, without that, you would be running into a lot of problems right now trying to cut these ribs out. A boning knife is one of my favorite knives to have. It is so versatile and it has so many uses. I use this knife probably more than any of the other knives I have. Look at that. Beautiful, beautiful piece of meat right there. If you've never had deer rib meat, again, I highly, highly recommend it. If you were here right now, I would make each and every one of you a nice deer rib burger. I guarantee you'd love it. If you're a carnivore like myself, you would absolutely love it. I know I do. And you see on the outside of this rib here, we got some meat and some fat. Trim all that stuff off. I don't let any of this go to waste. There's going to be some residual on there, but that'll cook down whenever it gets made into bone broth. And that'll just add some additional collagen to the mix, which is always good. Collagen is super essential. Most people are highly deficient in collagen because the cuts of meat that have collagen in there, it's not really something that is appealing to most consumers. So the amount of collagen we actually get in our diets, considering the average American consumes 2.5 ounces of red meat a day, and that is the only place that you can get collagen is from animal products. The amount of collagen we get is very, very minimal. And starting at age 20, your body starts losing 1% of the collagen every single year from that year on. So by the time you're, 80 years old, you've lost 60% of the collagen in your entire body. And that also accounts for your body's ability to make additional collagen. So getting ahead of that now and consuming as much collagen as possible is going to be a very, very wise thing to do. Prioritizing it now, building up as much collagen as you possibly can. And that's actually going to really reverse aging or stop aging, because your body not producing collagen is part of the natural aging process. And if you consume a lot of collagen, you're going to stop that process pretty quick. I started consuming bone broth and collagen and stuff when I started healing my gut, when I started my gut healing journey, which took me about a year to fully heal my gut, by the way. It's not an easy process, but my gut was also in a very bad condition, so it makes sense that it would take quite a bit of time. But in our modern world, we're so used to having everything right now. Like Amazon, we gotta have it next day, and we want a quick fix. Let's take this Ozempic drug and lose all the weight we need to lose, and don't worry about the consequences, it's okay. I have to use my long knife for this. This is cut along the front portion of what was left of the neck here, so it's a big chunk of meat. But yeah, everybody wants a quick fix, but nothing's ever gained from these quick fixes. And in a lot of cases, it's actually going to be more detrimental to your health, because all these miracle drugs and stuff like that, they come with a lot of nasty side effects, and then you become very reliant on them. You're spending your hard-earned money. Look at that chunk of meat. Beautiful. Spending your hard-earned money on these pharmaceuticals that you become completely reliant on, and you can never go off of, because the moment you do, guess what? You lose all your results. Whereas if you just sucked it up, buttercup, did things the right way, put in some hard work, had a little dedication, committed yourself, you would actually not only lose the weight you want to lose, but you would you would gain a lot of mental fortitude, you would gain a lot of discipline, and you would just increase yourself overall. I mean, you're going to improve yourself overall instead of just going after this quick fix, because the only thing you're getting from that is weight loss. That's the only benefit you would get from it. But if you do things the right way and you put in the hard work, there's a lot of other benefits you're getting, which is all the stuff I just mentioned. We discount the impact that being disciplined and building positive, good habits can have. But that's the stuff you carry with you for the rest of your life. Because once you do something like that and you lose weight the right way, and you eat like a carnivore diet, or you focus heavily on meat, you eat a diet of real whole foods, and you discipline yourself, and you exercise, and really improve yourself overall, you're going to come out of that being a much better person than you were when you went in. And when you take a drug like that, like Ozempic, you don't get any of that. You miss out on all that stuff. And when you lose all that weight, you're going to be just as lazy and unmotivated as you were before when you went into it. Now, you might be a little bit more energetic since you don't have all that extra weight to carry around, but you're not going to improve yourself in the way that you would if you put in the hard work. All right, so that side also went quite fast. And now I can come in here, cut these ribs out individually. These are going to be a little bit of a bear, I think. Some of them, like this one here, I think the sternum is actually connected on this side. You can see that right there. So I'm going to have a harder time getting through this. But I'll go ahead and trim this fat off at least. You can see, compared to a cow, there's not much fat on these animals. But how hard it is to cut this fat, it is a very, very waxy, dry, thick fat. Much different than the stuff you find on cows or most ruminant animals. So hopefully for those of you watching this video, this just kind of shows you the kind of work that goes into everything that you consume if you're eating meat. You know, it's not as simple as going to the grocery store and just picking up the meat you want. There's a big process that goes into that, and it's important to get in tune with that. It's important to understand where your meat is coming from so that you have a more deeply rooted respect for it. I think the more that we can understand and respect where our food comes from, the more gratitude we can have towards being able to consume it. And it's not something that's just granted to you. It's not something that should be taken lightly. It's an animal's life that is being sacrificed so that you can thrive and live your best life. So hopefully this just kind of gives you a little bit more of a respect for where your food comes from, what goes into it. If this is something you've never experienced, I hope you get the chance to one day. I really do, because I think it'll open your eyes up to a whole different world and give you a much deeper respect for the food that you consume. And again, it's very fulfilling. It can give you a sense of purpose, which is what it does for me. When I go out and I sit in the woods, it's very relaxing. You go out there first thing in the morning. You watch the woods come to life as the sun comes up. Squirrels start running around. Deer start coming out. There's all kinds of different animals out there. Birds start chirping. It's just gorgeous. You know, it's beautiful. It's getting back in touch with nature and the natural order of things, which for me is like nature's therapy, honestly. It just does wonders for your overall mental state, puts you in a positive mood. Because again, it's, you know, this is something, it's a way of living that we would have had throughout all of history. And now we don't have that. We're stuck in boxes and cubes all day. And we spend very little time outside. And the time we do spend outside is not spent in nature. It's just going from our car to work, from our work to our car, to our house. And repeat that process over and over and over, and that's our lives now. It's not a way to live. These last ones here, they get kind of tough. Again, this is why people let this go to waste, because most people don't want to deal with all this. They don't want to have to go through all this. I don't mind it. I enjoy this kind of stuff. It's not a big deal to me. And the payoff you get, the amount of meat that's over here, you can't see all of it in the frame, but I'll show you here in a minute. It's a lot. There's a lot of meat over here. I mean, it's wild. And it would just blow my mind to have this go to waste and not keep all this for real. Crying freaking shame. I always say, like, losing meat, letting it go to waste is like losing a relative. It's like it hits me very hard. It's not something I enjoy. So you want to talk about saving money now. This is the way you save money. This daggone... Even if I was just to use all these scraps for my dog, this would last me a long time. I probably have, I don't know, 10, 15 pounds of meat over here now, maybe more. I know these ribs by themselves, like when I was carrying them in here, they were freaking heavy. Had to be like 50 pounds. There's not quite that much meat on here, 50 pounds worth, but I probably wind up with, I'd say about 20 pounds, if I had to guess. Which would last my dog quite a while because she only eats like 1.5 pounds a day. So obviously there's a bunch of other stuff I'd want to include in her diet, but I mean, this would make up the majority of it. You have all this red meat and stuff in there, and she does very well with deer. Matter of fact, when I was out there hosing this off, I was throwing some scraps out to her, which she loves. She goes crazy for that stuff. She's probably out there sniffing around now. A lot of people, they refrain from doing that because they think that, you know, if their dog eats deer and stuff, they'll start running deer. And they'll never have deer in their area because the dogs will run them out. But as long as your dog's properly trained not to do that kind of stuff, you really don't have to worry about it. I've never had a problem with her going out in the woods and running deer. Now, if she sees a deer, like in my yard or something, which happens quite a bit, she'll chase after them. But she doesn't chase them through the woods. Like, she'll chase them for 100 yards or something and come back. She more or less just runs them out of the area because she doesn't want them up here. She's very protective of her homestead. So that's all she does. Another rib down. We got 2 more to go. The front 2 ribs I'll probably leave on. I'll just trim all the meat off them. They're real short anyway. Again, nothing glamorous about this, all right? Nothing glamorous about it. It's not sexy. But it's part of being self-reliant, providing for yourself. I take comfort in knowing that if something ever happens in the world, I don't really have to worry about too much because I've got quite a bit of food out here that I can get, and I know how to fend for myself and provide for myself, which is a very important skill that not many people have these days. There was a statistic I read not too long ago that said it was back in 50 or 70, I can't remember which, but over 50-some% of America produced and provided their own food. And today, that number is 0.1%. 0.1%. That is staggering. That means that everybody pretty much relies on the industrial food complex, and hardly anybody grows and produces their own food. I would say even for the people that do, they probably don't grow and produce enough to live off of it year-round. It's probably just like seasonal vegetables and stuff like that. Maybe there's some people with homesteads now. Probably a few more over the last 5 or so years because everybody got kind of scared that they were going to lose access to food, and they ran out and bought chickens and stuff like that, whatever they could get. But the number is still pretty small. I mean, you think about all the people that live in cities and stuff now, that's where most of the major population centers are. It kind of makes sense. You can't really have a lot of that stuff in the cities unless you have community gardens and people do farm shares or whatever. But again, that's a minority of people. The average American is not doing that kind of stuff. Nice chunk of meat. Getting up in the neck here now. Sorry, so this is all that's left right now is just the spine. And I've got the front section here, the sternum and the front 2 ribs. So I'm going to come in here, just trim off as much of this meat here as I possibly can, get some of this fat back here off. That way there's no waste. But once this is done, this is going to go out to the coyotes, and they're going to be very, very happy. And I'm almost there, almost to that point. You know, a lot of people will say that this is gross, and they don't like doing this kind of stuff, or they wouldn't want to do this kind of stuff. To me, this is a beautiful thing. This is a beautiful and amazing thing. To be able to provide for yourself. You know, if I had a family, the thought of being able to go out in the woods behind my house and provide for my family and not having to rely on the industrial food complex and somebody else providing food for me and providing food for me and my family, that is a very empowering thing. Because you can take comfort in knowing that whatever happens, you're at least not going to starve to death. You're going to be able to go out there, you're going to be able to get the food you need. Even if you don't have money, you lose your job, the financial system shuts down, you can't buy food, whatever it is, whatever happens. There's a supply chain disruption, food system goes haywire, you're set. You can go out there and you can provide for you and your family. That's a powerful thing. That's a part of being a human. And specifically, it's part of being a man. Because back in the day, that's what the men did. Men are providers. They're supposed to be providers. When it comes to this kind of stuff, the more self-reliant you can be, the less and less money you need. That's another big point. You get away from all these commodities and big industry and stuff. You just don't need money. So you can get by on a lot less money. That's kind of how I've set myself up. This deer right here, it's not costing me anything but time. And that time I'm spending doing this, I'll probably get back in health. So it kind of evens itself out. And the act of hunting, it's not easy. Hunting is not easy. Cleaning this animal and stuff, it's not easy, but hunting itself is also very difficult. It is a skill. It's a learned skill, just like everything else. A lot of people think you just go out there and you shoot an animal and you drag it out and you eat it. That's not it at all. You can go out there, you can hunt for days and weeks on end and not see or kill anything. And, that happens sometimes. It definitely happens. I'm a week into the hunting process right now. And while I could have killed animals by now, obviously, I haven't. And there's a chance that, I'll go out there tonight or the next time I go and I won't see anything. And that right there is precisely the reason why humans are able to consume other types of food, because there are times where we'd go out and we'd hunt and we simply wouldn't be able to get food. We're always going to go towards the most nutrient-dense food that we can, which is always going to be meat. And that's going to be the number one thing that we strive for. But in the off chance that we can't get meat, we have the ability to consume other foods. And that's going to keep us alive. It's going to allow us to survive. That's what has kept our species going for all this time. So demonizing certain foods, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, those foods aren't optimal and we shouldn't be surviving on them. My belief is that we should definitely have a diet centered around red meat and meat specifically. But we are able to consume other foods, and it is because we're survivalists. And it's actually a gift. It's not something that should be frowned upon or berated or argued about. I know there's a big argument out there that argues about eating other foods and plants and stuff like that. Which, I get it, because I don't eat plants either, so I don't have much room to talk. But, I don't think all plants are inherently terrible for you. I just don't think they're optimal. And for today, in our modern state, because of our health and the dire straits it's in and the toxic food we consume and the toxic things that are on the plants in our modern environment, because they spray them down with pesticides and herbicides and grow them in synthetic fertilized soil and all this really bad stuff, it just leads to our bodies being more toxic than they should be, and they lead to the foods being more toxic than they should be. And I think that's what's really contributing to all of our problems, because we can survive on other foods. And again, they're not going to be optimal, but if they're grown responsibly and correctly, and they're not full of all this crap, it's probably not going to have that much of a negative impact on our health like it does today. And I think another big problem is that we try and focus on eating, a diet primarily of those foods, when those foods should be used for survival and as a supplement to our diets, and not as the center of our diets. And that's where we get it wrong. The center of our diets has always been meat. It needs to continue to be meat in order for us to live a healthy and optimal life. And that is just my belief. See, even all these little scraps that are along the spine and stuff right here, this is a lot of really good meat. And again, this is stuff that would go to waste. Well, it would go to the coyotes out there. Like I mentioned before, 2.5 ounces of red meat, average American right here. Yeah, it's crazy. I can't get behind that. We need much more meat, much more red meat than 2.5 ounces. I will say that. And that's one of the big problems. We've taken out the amount of red meat we would normally consume and replaced it with hyper-processed crap that is absolutely destroying our health. The good thing about this meat is that it's not high-use muscles. You know, this stuff on the ribs and all that, it's not something that would get used and stressed very much, so it makes it very, very tender. And that's the shame of wasting this kind of meat, because you're essentially wasting some of the best, most tender meat in the animal. That's why I like to save it all. Now, what I'll end up doing with all this once I get up there is I'm going to take this upstairs, put it in some big old bowls, and I'll just rinse it out real well. And I might soak it in the fridge overnight as well, and then rinse it one more time in the morning. And then once it's rinsed and it's been soaked, I'll sort through it, decide what I want to keep for my dog, what I want to keep for myself, and then I'll just package it up. And once it's packaged, I'll put it in the freezer. Now, to package it, I'm probably going to use butcher paper, which is my favorite way of freezing meat in the freezer. I find that it keeps a very, very long time that way. The only other option I found that keeps meat even longer, or just as long as butcher paper, is vacuum sealing. But obviously, if you vacuum seal, you are going to be using plastic. So, you know, pick your battles, I guess. I still use vacuum sealing occasionally, and I still use Ziploc bags occasionally. I don't feel like it's necessarily a terrible thing. It's definitely not optimal, but it's not as bad as if you were like heating plastic and stuff, because when you heat plastic, that's when a lot of the harmful chemicals really start to leach out. But again, pick your battles. I do a lot of other things to optimize my health and make sure I reduce my toxic exposure. If the only thing I'm doing that could be possibly detrimental to my health is, you know, putting my meat in a plastic bag and putting it in the freezer, I guess that's not too bad. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. That's a key thing to remember. As long as you're making strides to improve and making a conscious effort to optimize your health and reduce your toxic exposure, in most cases, that's going to be good enough. All right, this is almost done. I mean, there's very, very little on here. It's getting to the point where I'm just cutting off little tiny pieces now. You can see this mountain of meat over here on the side that's stacking up. That's just rib meat too, by the way. I'm going to show you all the other meat I have over here. It's a lot. But when they talk about, you know, food waste and stuff like that, I would say that carnivore is probably the least wasteful way of eating, because of the stuff I mentioned before. You're just going to use all the stuff that you buy. I mean, you really are. You're going to use every bit of it. And then, you know, on top of that, something else you don't really think about, but your body is going to use everything that you consume, because there's no waste in any of this meat that you consume. It goes in your body. Your body knows exactly what to do with it. It digests it, puts it exactly where it needs to go. And what you're left with is pretty much zero waste. I mean, a lot of people talk about how their digestion improves on carnivore when you get rid of fiber and stuff like that. That was unequivocally the case for me, because I had horrible digestion to the point where I was just passing stuff that I consumed the same way it went in. It would come out the same exact way. And, you know, I had constipation and stuff like that. When I went carnivore, it all went away. All my constipation went away. My digestive issues went away. Took a while, of course. It took a while to undo all that damage, but it did go away. And I never get constipated anymore. I do not have to worry about bathroom problems anymore. And I will say that my digestion, my going to the bathroom, going number 2, is better than it's ever been in my entire life. And I have very little waste. I go like once a week, sometimes twice a week. But when I go, it's very effortless, very seamless. It does not stink. There's not huge, bulky stools. It's very small because my body's using everything. So when you go carnivore, you're reducing your waste footprint substantially in a lot of different ways. I mean, I take trash out like once every 2 or 3 months. That's no joke. Once every 2 or 3 months. Because I'm eating stuff like this. I mean, what waste do I have? I have the butcher paper that I pull my meat out of. And that is it. Unless I'm going out and buying stupid stuff I don't need. So it takes a long time to fill up a trash can of butcher paper. I can tell you that. It takes a real long time. I don't use plastic bottles. I don't use really anything plastic anymore. As much as I can get away from that anyway. So I don't have any plastic waste. Sometimes if I go to the grocery store or something like that, or my local butcher shop, you know, I have some plastic bags. But I reuse those. I use them for trash bags. I've got a whole closet full of them up there. So at least it's not going to the landfill. But this way of eating can be a very, very good way to reduce your waste footprint. And that's something that is not thought about enough, because us as humans, again, we've adopted this very wasteful lifestyle, this wasteful mindset. We just consume, and we throw away, and we reconsume, and we throw away and reconsume. We repeat that process over and over and over until you've got landfills full of garbage that are basically making the environment toxic. But they want to say that animals like this are destroying the planet. I don't know about you, but I beg to differ. All right, so this thing is pretty much done. I've gotten as much as I can get off this thing. As you can see, I'm just left with the spine here. That is all that's left. I got 2 small ribs at the front, which I have a really hard time getting off. I'm just gonna leave those on there. But I've taken pretty much all the meat I can get. There's a few small little scraps on here that are really hard to get the knife in there to get off, because in between all the vertebrae and stuff, there's a lot of little bones that stick out kind of like this. And it's really hard to get those little morsels out. So I'm gonna let the coyotes have it. But all in all, that's what I'm left with. You can see that it went from a huge thing of meat to just this one piece now. And this is the only thing that's going to get put back in nature. The rest of it, which I'm going to show you here in a second, is going to go for me and my dog. All right, so here's what I ended up with. This is my pile for my dog. Now what I did here is I just came in and I took like these big chunks right here, and I'm cutting off all of the fat, and I'm putting that in the bowls over here, and I'm sectioning this up into small chunks, and then I'll just package this up. And then anything that was too dirty, I'm gonna cook, and that's what this pot's for. So I've got a little bit more in here that I'll end up cooking for her. And then I've got my rib meat here, rinsing that off. Got another pile of just miscellaneous meat. And pretty much all of the belly flap meat, the stuff that really had a lot of the trauma and stuff on it and that was kind of dirty. You can see the trauma here. I'm keeping this for my dog. So she's gonna get a lot more than me, as you can tell, but I've still got quite a bit, and that's gonna make some amazing ground venison. All right, so here's the pot of bone broth. This is all the rib bones and the sternum. So I've got this, right now I've got it on high. I'm gonna let this go about 4 hours on high, and then I'll come in here, and this is probably gonna be like stew, so I may actually pull the meat and stuff out of there, as much of the meat as I can. And then I'll turn it on low, and I'll let it go another about 16 hours or so. And then I'll pull it off in the morning, and it should be fantastic bone broth with all this collagen and connective tissue in there. So I did weigh all that meat, and that ended up being 28 pounds. So that's 28 pounds of meat that I saved from being scrap for the coyotes. And I split that between me and my dog. We got probably about an even amount, actually. So that's quite a bit. And then I had some tendon, and with the fat as well, it came up to like just at 40 pounds. That is a lot. So my freezer's starting to fill up. I'm getting pretty happy about that. And then speaking of not wasting anything, I always keep the heart as well. My parents didn't want it, so you know I've got to do it. All right, so I'm just gonna come in here, start on one end. I got my fillet knife, which I just sharpened. It is very, very sharp now finally. Get this baby chopped up. This is the way I like to cook it. I don't know how you guys cook your heart if you eat heart, but I usually just cook it like little mini steaks. I don't cut it too thick. And when I cook it, I also do not cook it too well done. So I like to leave it somewhat raw in the center. You can see there's still some blood and stuff on the inside. But that's just my personal preference. I don't like overcooking any kind of organs. I like to leave it somewhat raw. That way the bioavailability of the nutrients is left intact and you don't degrade any of the nutrients that are in the meat. Some people consume this stuff raw. Personally, I've done that, but I'm not a huge fan of it because it just lacks a lot of flavor and it's not very appealing to me. So cooking it has always worked out pretty well for me. So that's what I do. All right, there it is. Easy enough. I'll take this blood out of here. I probably won't eat that, but the rest of this, I'm going to take maybe about this much here. I'm going to cook that tonight, put this in the freezer. I hope you like this. Hope you got some value out of this. And if anything else, I hope this just gives you a deeper understanding, respect, and appreciation for where your food comes from. Because even though this was sourced locally and this was hunted from my area, this is the reality of meat. If you're eating meat, this is the process that happens. And I think it's very important to reconnect with that, understand it, respect the animals, appreciate the sacrifice that they gave so that you can thrive and live an optimal life. If you haven't done so already, be sure to like, subscribe, join the Apex Tribe. I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace out.